Fantastic, thank you, and welcome everybody. Fantastic turnout for this evening. Welcome you all back, and recordings just come out in progress as well. So there we go. Um, just like to thank Andy for setting this up and making it back through the traffic, and obviously John as well. This evening we've got Duncan heading the achievement scheme, and we've got the majority of the achievement scheme review committee here this evening. Primarily, I think this is going to be a discussion about the latest developments and new developments, and plenty of Q&As at the end. Duncan, over to you and the team, please, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark. And just want to say it's a pleasure to be able to deliver the first in this season's series of In the Airs tonight. What we're going to do this evening is talk about just a few of the sort of key changes in the scheme for 2022, things that have happened over the last few months that we plan to introduce next year. Excuse me, Andy, thank you, Andy. But primarily, we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for a Q&A session, just so that we can get your feedback and also answer questions that you want to ask us. You know, it's obviously very easy for us to know what we'd like to tell you, and we've just cherry picked a few of the key things for tonight. But more importantly, we want to spend the time on things that you want to hear about. As Mark has said, I'm joined tonight by quite a few, I think it's 6 or 7 other members of the Achievement Scheme Review Committee. I'm going to lead through the PowerPoint presentation, but my fellow committee members will jump in, I'm sure, at various points in case if there's anything vital I miss out, or where they can perhaps sort of add to what's on the screen in front of you. So yeah, basically this is the first slide. So it's myself and ASRC. You can hopefully you can see all the panelists and their names. But what I'm going to talk about is really what's new for 2022, and there's several key points that you may or may not be aware of. You may have been reading the regular achievement scheme column articles in the BMFA news. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about tonight have been covered in that. So without further ado, Andy, if I could have the next slide.
I'll bring that up in just a moment. I'll just remind everybody of the process. If they want to ask a question, if you type it into the Q&A box, and then we'll bring them in at appropriate. And then at the end of the presentation, we can also bring in the questions, and we can open up people to speak as well if need be. So if you've any questions while he's doing the presentation, just type them into the Q&A box, please. Okay.
Perfect. Hopefully it won't take too long. I'd like to just spend 10 or 15 minutes running through the presentation so we can spend more time on the Q&A. So, okay, next slide, please, Andy.
Okay.
So what are we going to talk about tonight? First of all, we're going to talk about examiners and the RCC, the Registration Competency Certificate. Then we're going to talk about the new Examiner Retirement Award that we're introducing for next year. Say a little bit about the camera drone test that we introduced earlier this year and the proposed changes for next. And also about the Training and Testing Days initiative that we've been sort of trialing throughout this year at Buckminster, and also some at other clubs in various areas throughout the country. So we're really quite sort of excited about these things because they've proved to be very popular and the uptake's been good, and we think they're a really good way of raising awareness of the scheme and engagement by members. So those are the 4 things that we're going to briefly run through for you before we start the Q&A. So next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, as I got on the bottom of this slide here, most importantly in red, there aren't any changes to the content of any of the tests for 2022. So there's nothing dramatic happening there where we're not changing any maneuvers in the fixed wing or fixed wing A or B or helicopter tests or whatever. So there are no changes to any of the required maneuvers. These are more organizational changes, the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight. Thanks, Andy. Okay, next slide. So examiners and the registration competency certificate. you're probably aware that we've been sort of pushing the RCC really since the beginning of this year, primarily because it's the most relevant test to members. The bulk of our members will be flying under our Article 16 authorization, which came into effect at the beginning of this year. And the RCC is based solely on our Article 16 authorization. So it's the most relevant test. And it's important to make that point. Our members can be perfectly legal by also completing the CAA's DMARIS test, but that test is more focused on drone operators rather than model flyers, and really isn't what's the right word? It's not based on our Article 16 authorization, whereas our RCC is. So that's the reason we've been encouraging members to take the RCC, because if nothing else, it's a really good way of making sure that you are aware of what's in the authorization. Obviously, you can sit and read through the pages of the authorization itself, which is also good, but the RCC is an excellent way of becoming familiar with it. Important point to make is it's already been changed twice this year, and it's a sort of living document. It will evolve over time. If there are any changes to our authorization, the RCC will be modified or changed accordingly. And it's exactly the same format as the CAA DMARIS test, in that it's an online multiple choice 40 questions test. Okay, next slide, please, Andy. Now, I hope you're aware that any member who had an achievement scheme certificate that they gained before the 1st of January this year could demonstrate competence to the CAA, not by taking the RCC, not by taking the CAA DMARIS test, but by claiming grandfather rights. And that basically involved the member ticking a box on the membership portal to say that they had read and understood the Article 16 authorization, but they didn't have to do any more than that. And unfortunately, during the year, there's been a number of notable incidents that were reported back to the committee. Some of it's come via the BMFA Areas Council, which is where all the representatives from all the clubs nationally get together and have a meeting, swap notes, etc., etc. So we've had evidence, unfortunately, where we've known that examiners obviously aren't familiar with what's in the RCC. They weren't aware that CAP 658 had been withdrawn. And we're also aware of examiners that aren't active within their clubs. And it's slightly embarrassing when you have test candidates who turn up for a test and they're better informed because they've watched the guidance videos that we produce, they've read all the guidance notes, etc., etc. And we've had a number of incidences where the candidates have been better informed than the examiners. So that's another reason that we've gone the way that we've gone. Could I have the next slide, please, Andy?
Yes, just before that, John Collister's asking a question about the RCC and how we find out if they've taken the most recent version. Mm-hmm. Your certificate has the date you've completed it on, if it was taken after the 1st of January this year. The RCC website where the test is held is going to be updated, so it shows what version it currently is when it was last changed. And we'll also include a notice that we send out via the Achievement Scheme website whenever it's updated as well, so people are aware. So you will be able to find out quite easy.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Okay, so next slide. And some of you may be aware that the examiner continued competence, in inverted commas, has been a subject that the ASRC have been asked to consider on and off over the last, well, probably the last 10 years on and off. because it's important that examiners remain current and up to date, etc., etc. And because of what had happened this year, we basically revisited that discussion. And the Article 16 authorization, the recent legal changes around really the heightened awareness of the legal requirements around our activities has really kind of brought all this to a head. And we do need we need all members to be familiar with the Article 16 authorization and or CAP 722F, but examiners especially. So next slide, please, Andy. So what have we done? So for 2022 and beyond, although many examiners will have been able to claim grandfather rights, we're asking that all examiners, if they wish to continue in the role, have taken and passed the current version of the RCC, and we've already touched on what we mean by current RCC here. Importantly, this will be administered by the BMFA office, so we're not asking clubs to do this at this stage, simply because it's much easier for the office to identify whether a member has taken the RCC or not. So it's easier for them to identify that rather than ask the club secretary to go off and have to do it. It will be the examiner's own responsibility to complete the test. But when at the time of re-ratification, in other words, when the club completes its online, affiliated clubs complete their online returns for their re-affiliation, that's the time when this will be flagged. In other words, if they put down or re-ratify examiners that haven't got the RCC, that will be flagged up by the office. And that notification of that will go straight to the examiner and also the club secretary. So what we're going to do in advance of this is notify all examiners and club secretaries by direct email to tell them about this process. In fact, I've just finished drafting the letter that will go to all examiners and copy to club secretaries as well. Okay, next slide, please, Andy.
There's a couple of questions on there.
Sure, not unreasonably.
Yeah, John Black's asking, do examiners have to take every version of the RCC? They need to have passed the latest one.
The latest, yeah.
So essentially, if it changes, and we don't envisage there being huge amount of changes, to be honest, there might be minor tweaks as through the year, but when we say the latest version, currently the latest version is the test that's been online since the 1st of January this year. Although there was a minor tweak in May, it's not the minor tweak doesn't really warrant calling it a new version. So anybody who has passed it since the 1st of January 2021, to all intents and purposes, has got the latest version. Okay, and we're not envisaging any changes. It depends when the Article 16 gets reissued, which is probably going to be the end of the year. If there's any changes in there that mean we have to adjust the questions, but it's unlikely, I would suggest. So you may find that you might have to do it once a year at the most, I would imagine. I suspect once things settle down, it's probably once every few years. So at the moment, ultimately, if we have a new version of the test, yes, you have to take the new version. Jonathan Smith asked, is the first 2021 RCC good enough? The yes. And Richard says the RCC states that it's valid for 5 years. In terms of competence for the CAA, or to be recognised as competent, yes, it's valid for 5 years from the date you've passed. However, in terms of the requirements of an examiner, which is to be up to date, it's valid in terms of maintaining examiner status until it changes to a newer version. Okay.
Absolutely. That's a good point to make, actually, Andy. That's excellent. Yeah, really useful.
So that's those answered.
Okay.
There you go.
Next slide. Okay. In conjunction with the requirement for examiners to hold the RCC, we've also tweaked the re-ratification process. And as you'll see on the screen here, it has been for several years. This is an online process, but now the online process just asks these 3 specific questions for each of the examiners that a club is wanting to re-ratify. So are they still active? Do they still attend at the flying field regular? And have they kept up to date and current with changes in the scheme? If a club secretary ticks yes to all of those, then that's fine, and basically they move on, and the process is done and dusted. If they tick no to any of those 3 questions, then it prompts the club secretary and asks them, do they wish to award a certificate to the retiring examiner? So next slide, please, Andy.
With another question.
Oh, okay.
This is Martin Fairchild who's put this in the chat box, and he's asking if an examiner is not current at the start of 2022, i.e. doesn't have the latest RCC, does that mean they are unable to complete any examinations until current?
Yes.
Effectively, yes, because they won't be ratified until they've got the latest version of the RCC on there, so they won't be able to do any tests. And that will be from not the start of 2022, it's the 31st of January 2022, which is when everybody's examiner status expires if they haven't been ratified. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that there's that month's grace period, isn't there?
Duncan, just before you get started again, Rob
Sure.
asks if the RCC changes sufficiently that I, as an examiner, need to do it again, will I be told?
Yes.
Right, that's cool.
It'll be notified through the Achievement Scheme website that there has been a change that to the RCC, and what the start date of the latest version is.
Yeah, and Craig Kane asks, what is the attendance criteria? Are you leaving that to the clubs to dictate?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we absolutely rely on clubs to administer the scheme for us at club level, because really it's only the clubs and the club committees know whether the examiners satisfy these 3 criteria on the screen at the moment. Are they there regularly? Are they promoting the scheme? Are they helping members in terms of encouraging them to do tests? So, and with the best will in the world, myself and fellow members of the Achievement Scheme Review Committee, we couldn't possibly administer all 800 clubs and the just under 1,000 examiners we have out there. We rely on clubs to do that for us. Obviously, we're here for any help and guidance that we can give them, and if they have any questions, we're at the end of the phone or at the end of email. But it's an important role that they play, and we thank them for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've another question from Barry Vernon relating to the RCC.
Okay.
It says, slightly off tap, but are mandatory questions still part of the assessment, or does passing the RCC negate the need to answer these during an assessment for A and B test?
If you hold the RCC or a current version of the RCC, you are exempt from answering the mandatory questions at the pointer test. But it's up to the candidate to demonstrate to the examiner at the pointer test that they hold the current RCC. In other words, go along with a copy of your certificate or have it on your phone or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. It's, as I say, currently any RCC taken after the 1st of January this year would exempt you.
Yeah. That's another important point, because that's another way we're encouraging members to take the RCC. Okay.
Go for it.
Which brings us quite nicely onto the Examiner Retirement Award. It's a bit of an incentive for inactive examiners to retire. And the 3 questions that we had on the screen previously are there to sort of prick the conscience of clubs and to say to them, because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that suggests that there are quite a few examiners who aren't active anymore, but the clubs keep them on in the roles as a sign of respect and as a way of saying thanks. So what we thought we'd do was introduce an official retirement award for examiners who've probably been volunteers for quite some years, helping us run and deliver the scheme. And it's just a nice way of being able to say thanks, because at the moment we have no mechanism for doing that, which is a shame, which is why we've introduced this award. So, next slide, please, Andy. So clubs can retire their examiners through the re-ratification process, which I've just answered. If they tick no to one or more of those various questions, it will prompt them to down the route of, well, would you like to given a retirement award to the examiner that you're not re-ratifying. Alternatively, the examiner could choose to stand down from the role themselves, and in which case they would contact the club and the club would run the application for them. The other important thing is it's not compulsory. If say, for example, the club's had a bit of a falling out with an examiner, as unfortunately happens every now and then, very, very rare event, I have to say, then it's not compulsory for them to issue a retirement award. And the retirement award is basically a certificate of appreciation. It's a bit like an A or B certificate. It's a nice certificate to put on your wall.
Duncan, can I just interject there just very quickly? Now, our good friend Mr. Nelson has just come in and said a gentle cull like Dignitas. Sorry, I had to say it.
Ian, as Andy Ellison would say, go and stand in a corner and think about what you've said now, Ian.
I think I can put him in a virtual corner.
But no, I hope you see it's, these are people that and these are people who've probably been supporting the scheme for decades, and we just think it's a nice way of being able to say thanks. And Andy's come up with a nice idea that it will actually stay on their membership card. So it'll say something like E and then brackets retired or whatever. We're not quite sure exactly how we'll do it on the membership cards, but we thought that was a nice way of just saying thanks. Okay, so camera drone tests. Hopefully you're aware of the British Drone Flyers Association and the BMFA's initiative to bring more drone flyers into our fold. The more numbers we have, the bigger our voice with government, and who knows what's going to happen going forward. So the Achievement Scheme is supporting that initiative, and we introduced camera drone A test and BPC, basic proficiency certificates, earlier on this year. They're new certificates, and like any new certificate, we accept that in their early stages, they're very much open to feedback, or we're very much open to feedback, and the tests are open to refinement, really basically to see if we've got it right, and also to respond to grassroots experience of having run these tests. And of course, what we've seen during the year is actually very little uptake of the A test. And the reason there's very little uptake of the A test is it's not permitted to use GPS during an A test. And a lot of the current camera drones, there's no option to turn GPS off. So in a desire to encourage members to come forward and take these tests, and also to try and make the tests more appropriate for the type of machines that are out there that people and members are flying, we basically tweaked the test. And the test will be exactly the same as previous, but GPS will be permitted. Okay, Andy, next slide, please. So we've changed the camera drone A and BPC tests, and we now call it the camera drone certificate of competence. It's exactly the same test as it was before. The A and the BPC were always the same test. It was just the award that was different. But it's now called the Camera Drone Certificate of Competence. Same test as previously, but GPS is now permitted. And what we're hoping to do is encourage the drone flyers down this route. And also, don't forget, this is there to help clubs assess their members' competence, if you like. Because quite often, as I'm sure many of you are aware, achievement scheme tests, clubs use them to grant privileges, usually something along the lines of, if you've got an A or a BPC, you can fly solo or unsupervised or whatever. And what we're hoping is the camera drone certificate of competence will be used in exactly the same way. Okay, do we have any questions on that before we move on, or before we change subject? Nope.
No, that's good.
Okay. Next slide, please, Andy. So training and testing days, and basically these involve our area chief examiners visiting clubs to promote the scheme and to deliver some coaching, encouragement, and also conduct tests. As I mentioned right at the beginning, it's a concept that we, Achievement Scheme Review Committee, and particularly the northwestern area, sorry, but not exclusively the northwestern area, have been trialing over the last 12 months. We've had a number of very successful events at Buckminster, and there have been successful events at various clubs around the country. And we're, via Areas Council, we're encouraging all of the areas to adopt the initiative. The important thing, the point I want to make here is the bit in red, is we think training and testing days, because they're more member focused rather than being focused on examiners and instructors, we think they're far more, they're much better for the club environment. And as well as being there to encourage engagement with members, we're also very keen to show that engagement with the scheme can be fun. We don't want people to see it as an ordeal, that's something that they've got to get through. We want members, we do this for fun, don't we? Hopefully. And we want members to appreciate that we see the scheme operating that way as well.
Yeah. Duncan.
Yes, go on, Kevin. Go on, yes, please.
I'm just going to jump in a little bit. The experience within the Northwest has been very, very positive. And just to update people tonight, 12 clubs have come forward asking for attendance by area chief examiners. And that's in the process of being sorted out now. So the uptake could be greater. And I think that will roll out as we go into next year when people see what we come along doing. It is fun, as Duncan said. Once we start to do that, we're not there to tell a club how to run itself or what to do. We are there to encourage people to take the tests and to make a bit of fun while they do it. So more on that as we go along. But what it does do is it promotes discussion, and it promotes people to go back to their own clubs from such an event and say, hey, we could do with this at Club X. So yeah, I think it's a great initiative. And
me too. Yeah. Well, and the whole of the committee's behind it. And I think what was interesting when we came out of lockdown, we had quite a lot of inquiries along the lines of, we've got members who want to take tests, but we've got no examiners at our club. Because one of the other things I forgot to mention when we were talking about encouraging examiners to retire, it's absolutely vital that if we have got people retiring, we need to replace them. So again, by the ACEs going and visiting their clubs, they can not only encourage members to take A's and B tests, but they can look and encourage clubs or help clubs appoint club examiners.
I think there are some myths around the number of, there was some literature written within the BMFA about a suggested number of examiners for a particular club. You've got to remember that my experience is, I'm not going to name any names, but at least 2 of the clubs that we've been dealing with, they had examiners who were non-active. So they were frightened to take on board new ones because they thought they'd exceed this perceived number. And I said, no, let's get the ball rolling. We can go through the retirement process that Duncan has outlined in the future, perhaps. But the most important thing now is to get some of the younger people, the active people, on the road to become their own examiners, and then they can become self-sufficient.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, actually, Kevin. And there's an action on me to look at the wording in the achievement scheme handbook. Yeah, there is no limit within reason of how many examiners a club can have. There were recommended numbers previously, but that's a good point to make, actually, Kev. Thanks for raising that. Okay, Andy, next slide, please, because I think this is probably the last slide, and it just yeah, it's a little bit more about training and testing. So, and not only is it good for the clubs, it's good experience for our area chiefs. The primary role of an area chief examiner is to conduct club examiner tests or test people to become club examiners. And over recent years, there hasn't been a huge demand for that process. So it's this. Not only is it good for clubs to encourage members to engage in the scheme, this is also really good for our area chief examiners. It gives them something to do. And as it says here, so spark members' interest, attract new club examiners, and generally promote the scheme. So that's what these days are all about, just really to help members engage. Okay.
Sales asked a question sort of related to that. It says, if a chief examiner goes to a club and takes tests, does this reduce the opportunity for club examiners to do the tests?
Not really.
No.
You'd think it would be a focus for the club examiners to come out of the woodwork and get involved with the area chiefs and, do a bit of swapping stories and moving on. So not really.
On many of the training and testing days we do at Buckminster, when we do get some club examiners coming along to those. And often we'll have the club examiner act as the lead examiner for the test, and the chief examiner will be the second examiner. And that's the way. So everybody's getting a bit of practice and experience doing it that way. But ultimately, not all clubs have examiners. So
No.
If a club is needing some test doing, they need a chief examiner along to do that if they haven't got any club examiners.
Yep.
So hopefully that answers that one.
There's
Okay.
a question from Eb Swarbrick here. He said, I've searched through BritishDroneFlyers.org and cannot see anything about camera drone test details, but plenty about how to choose a drone. Where is the info, please?
Be on the achievement
I'll take this
scheme.
one.
Go on, Andy. Go on.
Yeah, it's on the achievement scheme website at the moment at achievements.bmfa.uk. But as soon as the 2022 document has been finalised, because there are a couple of changes taken away from the A and B PC, it will also be on the British Drone Flyers one, so you'll be able to access it from there.
Yeah, it's worth saying that's quite a lot of what we're talking about tonight is fairly hot off the press. These are things that the ASRC have only finalised in the last few weeks. So, okay, I think the next slide is just goes to it's the useful information slide, isn't it, Andy? It's the web address, I think. Yeah. So if you want to reference any of the test forms, the guidance booklets, the videos that we produced, they're all on the Achievement Scheme website, the address of which is in red on the screen in front of you. And I think we now throw the floor open for the Q&A session. So thank you everybody for your attention, and let's see what you guys want to talk about.
We've got a few more written questions. We'll get through those.
Okay.
Craig Kane, when an area doesn't hold training and achievement days, workshops, how do we ensure that we're all on the same page?
When they do, is that?
When an area doesn't hold.
Doesn't. Oh, well, you'll just beat them with a big stick, won't you, Mark, the areas to get them to... Seriously, this is the subject of training and testing days has been raised at Areas Council and discussed, and there was generally good support across all the 14 BMFA areas for it. I'm sure, like Kevin's Northwest area is a little bit ahead of the game because they started earlier this year, but I'd like to think over the next year or two, most areas will pick it up and run with it. So, only time will tell in that respect.
Can I open that back up to Craig to let us know which area he is suggesting that, if he is suggesting a specific area, and then we can probably address that. Quite happy to if there's
Craig's in Northern Ireland.
if it is Northern Ireland, well,
Yeah.
again, we can look at that. So
yeah, and we will. I mean, you're probably aware that for examiner and instructor workshops, we produce a guidance booklet, and I'm sure we'll do something like that for training and testing days, but we're going to keep it very simple, almost a single side of A4 with bullet points as to, try this works well, and things like that, rather than a very detailed guidance document, which probably people wouldn't read. So there will be some documentation to help consistency, but it will really just focus on things that we've tried and know work well.
It's very straightforward, isn't it?
It is.
Keep it light-hearted, informal, invite as many people as possible, have a handful of examiners on hand for doing the test and a handful of instructors, and good food, and they will come. It works really well.
Oh, the other important point to make is that areas have money in their budget for it, Mark, don't they? They can.
Absolutely.
The areas can apply to the honorary treasurer, and he will quite happily fund these events. So
But I have to say as well, I think sometimes it is up to whilst it's up to the area, sometimes the clubs can cajole their areas into it as well. So don't just sit back. If you want something, put it forward to your areas, and let's get them moving that way round. They're volunteers like all of us, and we have limited time and resources. But it's often who shouts the loudest gets it, doesn't it, Duncan? And that's
absolutely, yeah. And if you have any difficulty, you can always just contact myself or the committee.
I think we're actually expecting this to snowball, Mark. I think we've started early. It's gathering speed as we go along. Certainly when we get into next year, word will have spread, we'll have held more events. And I think this will really pick up pace as the weather improves, certainly through next year. It's very much a hands-on event. It's not a stale classroom event. It's a really get down there, get in the air, get flying, get involved type of event, but it's non-threatening as well. Not everybody's going to pass the tests on that particular day. And I think they need a lot of encouragement where they're going wrong. And my experience is that when they do come back, they've all been successful. From the first one that we held, there were 3 tests taken after the event, and they were all a pass, and that was within a week of the event. So, yeah, it's good.
Brilliant. We are evolving, and I think we're starting to learn a lot more lessons. So, I think it's good all round, and if it catches up with us, that's great. We can deal with that. That's a good position to be from. So, a couple more questions I'll go through, if I may, just quickly. John Collister, what percentage of clubs don't have an examiner? Do we know that?
No. In short, no. But no. I would suspect maybe 25% of clubs haven't got examiners, based on the number of clubs and the number of examiners. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Because we've got something like just under 1,000 club examiners. And how many affiliated clubs? 800?
850.
Yeah. So, in theory, that's more than one a club, but we know there are significant numbers of clubs that don't have examiners. Yeah,
I can check how many examiner return forms were submitted last year, which would give us an idea.
And we have just under 100 area chiefs. So if we divvy the clubs up among the area chiefs, it's roughly one area chief examiner for every 10 clubs. But
Gary Nunn, if a club examiner wants to continue but is not flight current, could he demonstrate by flying a B schedule?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's what the only currency requirement we're asking is that they have the RCC going forward. But we expect all examiners to be able to demonstrate the relevant B certificate for the discipline or disciplines that they have the appointment. So
I think what he might be trying to get at is that in our questions we ask the secretaries, are they up to snuff flying wise? So I think he might be asking what the sort of standard they're asking for there. And as you say, you basically got to convince your club that you are up to snuff, and generally the standard is you can demonstrate the B certificate to a passable standard.
Sure.
There's
Spot
a little
on.
bit more to it than that, to be fair. You're, as an examiner, you need to satisfy yourself that you're up to the standard as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, and most examiners should know. I mean, I felt my standard, you know, because I hadn't been doing much flying for a while. So I just made sure I got a suitable aircraft and got myself to make sure that I convinced myself that I was, which thankfully I did. But yeah, so there's two aspects of that. Your club will probably have a good idea that which examiners are capable still of flying a B certificate. And it'll be the ones that turn up and fly regular. You know, if somebody hasn't turned up at the field for 3 years, you know, it's not just the fact that he might still be a hotshot pilot that can fly a perfect B, but he's perhaps not suitable for an examiner because he's not there to do any examining. You know, it's more than just their own abilities. It's the availability as well that's important.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know about you guys. It's one of the things I always say. I view it very much as a use it or lose it. Every time I fly elements of the B test in every single flight. I won't necessarily do all the elements, but you know, especially as scheme controller, it would be very embarrassing if somebody asked me to do an outside loop, but I couldn't do it. So I make sure, because it is something. One of the things I always say to people: the key to passing a test is to practice. And it doesn't matter if you're a really interesting story. Going a little bit off piece. Hopefully, some of you will have seen the excellent helicopter A and B videos that Summer Fisher was really good and flew the maneuvers for us. In a little conversation with her beforehand, I mean, it was several years since she'd passed her helicopter B test, but she was quite happy to admit to me that she'd spent the previous week or so practicing the maneuvers because they weren't things she flew regularly. She was an F3N flyer, so the bonkers 3D stuff. So she didn't often fly, say, a top hat or a 4-point pirouette, things like that. And in preparation for the video, she spent a little bit of time practicing, like we all do. So yeah, I think that's one of the key things is for examiners, it's a use it or lose it. You need to remain current, and that applies to your flying skills as well. So anyway. Right.
Just
next.
quickly returning to John Collister's question from earlier on, asking how many clubs don't have examiners. I can tell you that in 2021 we had 285 examiner ratifications from clubs submitted. So, and they can submit more than one examiner in each one. So 285 clubs submitted ratifications. So that's actually suggesting that perhaps 60% of clubs haven't got examiners. Either that or they forgot to ratify them, in which case they've not got examiners now.
Not anymore. Not now. Yeah.
Just a quick one here. Derek Small's written an extremely long question. I'm going to leave it to the Achievement Scheme guys to have a look at that offline and probably come back on that offline because it's. I don't think it's something that we've got time to run through at the moment. But if you know, I think we'll keep that to one side, Andy, if we can, and go through that one. Barry Gregory says, does the BMFA recognise the CAA Remote Pilot Certificate of Competence A2 category for the Achievement Scheme?
We don't. Certainly, I mean, it's not for us to recognise the A2 CFC. That's the CAA. It's the CAA who recognise it. We don't add it onto our membership system because there's so many variations of it because there's so many different people doing it. So we will only add things as achievements on our system if we've got control of it. And that's the short answer. So we don't need to recognise it. Is you know, if hopefully that answers the question anyway.
Eugene Anker, although the candidate takes the RCC, I believe the examiner still needs to ask the questions from the handbook. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. If you have the RCC, you're exempt from the mandatory questions only. So the examiner will still ask a minimum of 5 questions for an A test or a minimum of 8 questions for a B test based on BMFA handbook and general safety, maybe club rules, site-specific things or whatever. So.
Shelley Redworth, sorry. Does passing the CAA test also negate a candidate needing to answer the compulsory questions? I'm assuming not.
No.
Yep, you've got a shake of the head there.
Yeah, it's got to be the RCC the mandatory questions are all based on the Article 16 authorisation. And the CAA Demaris test doesn't ask any questions about the Article 16 authorisation.
Apart here in the southeast, the area is very spread out. In the past, we've only had 2 clubs who welcomed us to hold the testing day. We always attract the same people, but the extremes of the area are not prepared to travel. Any suggestions on how we encourage other clubs to allow us to hold the events? Welcome.
Well, that was, I mean, Stuart Willis has reported this previously from the southeast, but those were examiner instructor workshops. The training and testing days are really quite different animals. The examiner instructor workshops, by their very nature, were focused on, by the very title, were focused on examiner instructors and primarily focused on consistency, whereas the training and testing is more targeted against for individual members and clubs to encourage engagement in the scheme. So what I would say in answer to that question is training and testing days are very different animals to what's gone previously. So I'd like to think the uptake will be different. And it's not a question of attracting people to an event. It's a question of taking the roadshow to individual clubs around the area and being delivered by area chiefs. So.
Yeah, the thing is, Duncan, they're not actually intrusive into a club's running.
No, that's another good important point, Kev. Yeah.
So if they want to run this, they can run it along with their normal pilots doing their normal flying. We don't interrupt what they do. We don't need specific slots unless there's a really good requirement to do so. Really, it's just normal flying day and we'll show you what we want.
Ron Russell asks a wonderful question, one that we've all been chatting about recently. I'll not try to get too political on this, but with so many clubs and members living in Scotland now joining the BMFA, can current long-standing actively flying SAA examiners examine the new BMFA members in Scotland?
They can, so long as they go through the BMFA appointment process to become a BMFA examiner. So we recognise the achievement scheme recognises the SAA awards. So they're bronze and bronze plus and silver, etc., etc. There's mutual recognition of those. But if an SAA examiner wants to examine people for BMFA certificates, he has to go through the BMFA appointment process.
Just further to that, in terms of the mutual recognition or recognising the SAA certificates, they will only be added as with the equivalent BMFA certificate if they've passed the RCC latest version.
Oh, good point, Andy. Yeah.
So because the SAA have never had the mandatory legal questions that we introduced in 2016. So we can't be certain that when they've passed the gold, silver, bronze, they have, or I think that they were ever asked any questions about the legal requirements. So any SAA member who's joined the BMFA and wants his bronze or silver converting to an A or a B, as long as he takes and passes the RCC, that can be done.
Yeah.
And similar, of course, with the examiners, they will need to pass the RCC to be considered.
And it's probably worth. Well, I'd just like to say thanks. I've said it before to Gary Armstrong in the northeast. The northeast region, area is our most northerly area, and Gary's gone across the border to conduct tests for BMFA members in Scotland to help deliver the scheme up there. So we are doing our best to support our Scottish brethren.
We're going to take 2 more questions and then we'll open it up, Andy, shall we, to everybody?
Yeah.
John Collister, just for the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes, and then so John Collister again. While it is called the RC Achievement Scheme, the BMFA is not RC only. While chatting to a CL guy earlier today, the subject of control line and achievement certs came up. Is this a possibility? He was certainly keen to look into it, possibly.
Well, it's interesting. the other disciplines, the free flight and controller, were, in my experience in the past, were very keen to make it very clear that it was only a radio competency scheme. So, but that was, of course, before CAA registration, etc., etc. So, if they choose to go that way, then there's no reason why we can't help them administer a scheme for those individual disciplines. If there's no reason why we can't do it, and we've got the experience of running it for RC, so all the administrative processes are all there. It just is a question of the technical aspects in terms of what the individual tests would constitute. So.
I would think if there is a groundswell of opinion amongst control line flyers to have an achievement scheme for control line, I would suggest approaching the control line technical committee on that. As I say, I suspect, I've only ever heard one person ask, that there isn't particularly a demand for it, but if enough control line flyers get in touch with the control line technical committee, say we want one, I'm sure it will happen.
Well, change of plan here. We've got another 6 questions through, so I think we'll keep on the questions if everybody's happy here, and we'll keep
fine.
Richard C. Why does it state in the scheme handbook introduction that the scheme is not about permitting and licensing, when most clubs and associations require us to pass an achievement certificate to fly? Surely that's a permit.
Well, it is. Well, go on then, Andy. I'll let you. But I mean, that's something. Go on, Andy.
Most clubs don't use the achievement scheme as the permit to fly unsupervised. It's about 50% do. Having said that, 100% of clubs have a duty of care to the members and the members of the public, the club members, to ensure that the operations happen safely. So I'm hoping that 100% of clubs have something in place to ensure that anybody flying unsupervised is competent to do so. The A test just happens to be at a perfect level for doing that. And I've said for many years, anybody who isn't capable of passing the A certificate perhaps isn't really safe to be left flying unsupervised. A club has to do something. They have a duty of care to ensure the competency of people flying unsupervised. The A certificate, it does say may be used for that. It equally may not be. I know some clubs that think it is not hard enough. So they have their own test, which has got a few extra manoeuvres in there. So I think that probably answers the question. It is something I get asked quite a lot, actually, as club sport officer.
We get it all the time, don't we? I mean, the key thing here is that the achievement scheme don't grant privileges. It's the clubs and other organisations that grant privileges based on our tests. So that's it may be a fine line between the two, but that's the important thing.
Right, back up to the border again. From Ron again. How would a BMFA member and SAA examiner living in Scotland with RCC pass get the required certification? Is it possible without a long trip south?
Well, as I say, Gary Armstrong, the coordinator for the Northeast region, has been doing good stuff north of the border for us. So I would say, in the first instance, contact Gary, and he'll see what he can arrange.
Well, the first step will be for the club to nominate them to be an examiner.
Yep.
And then we put whatever the measures are in place, whether it's Gary goes up there. I mean, I've been up to Scotland and done tests for a couple of clubs in the past, as and when required.
Yep.
Yeah. So the first thing is the club to put them forward to be a BMFA.
Yeah. Have a look at the appointment process, which is in the achievement scheme handbook. And as Andy says, that the first step in that is the club nominating an individual to become a club examiner and actually putting them forward to be tested for the role.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Cool.
Bob Hart, coming back on his previous point, isn't it more important that the examiner is able to recognise the ability of the person he's testing? He's not there to teach the person when he's testing. I might turn up to take a test without a suitable model to demonstrate with, and I would not be happy to show him with his plane lest something caused a crash.
I'm not quite sure what the question was there, Mark. Say again.
It's yeah, Bob, coming back on his previous one, and I have to say we've gone through a few questions since then, but isn't it more important that the examiner is able to recognise the ability of the person he's testing? I think that goes without saying, but is he not there to teach he is not there to teach the person when he's testing. I might turn up and take a test without a suitable model.
No, okay.
No.
I thought it's okay. The example I would give is, I might ask a pupil or a candidate or whatever, and they quite often candidates will come to approach an examiner and say, I don't know if I'm at the right standard or not. Can you watch me fly 2 consecutive rolls or an outside loop or whatever? And then you might watch them and say, yeah, okay, what you need to do, those rolls need to be a little bit slower, they need to be better centered, da 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 da. It's really useful to be able to say, actually, this is how I want it flown, and then you actually fly it to demonstrate for them. So it's not a hard and fast requirement, but I think it's a really good thing for an examiner to be able to do.
I think following on from what you just said there, Duncan, in the context of the training and testing days, is actually, make sure that who you're bringing along to those, your ACEs and examiners, that they're bringing a plane along such that if they need to demonstrate those maneuvers, they can do so. If it's, hey, I'm down the club and somebody's saying, oh, I want to test, okay, well, we'll go through, let's see what you can do. And you won't have an aircraft there ready for you. So, I've got a little model which I use, it's in my kit bag, and I'll demonstrate the model sort of doing the maneuvers, but without actually flying it. The last thing you want, quite agree, is for you to take over somebody's aeroplane, try and do the maneuvers in an aircraft which is not correctly set up, this, that, and t'other. So it's to bring it into context with, where are you in the sort of, are you on a training test day, or are you down the field and you're taking somebody for a test? I think that is also important. Over.
There's also a credibility thing as well. Your examiners are generally known within the club, and club members will be familiar to a certain extent with their flying ability. And if a candidate or members of the club know that the examiner is fully capable of doing these things that he's testing you on, I think it just lends a bit more credibility to it.
Duncan, another question here, reference RCC, one we missed from earlier. Will the RCC be changed or have a section for drones to reflect the drone competency test?
Me too.
Yes.
It's all the questions in the RCC are relevant for model aircraft and drones.
What can I say? Yeah,
It's about
already relevant.
Regulations for small unmanned aircraft. So
yeah,
NATO.
I think the key thing about the RCC is it's focused on our Article 16 authorization, which the 99% of our members, not necessarily British drone flying members, but 99% of BMFA members will be operating under. So it's deliberately based on the authorization. If that kind of helps.
Well, quick question here: should an area continue to run examiner instructor workshops as well as training testing days?
We have absolutely no problem with that. Yes, is a simple answer. I mean, they probably don't have the same broad appeal as training and testing days. I think that's the difference. They're, as we said earlier, they're really for a different audience, but they are important. We've run them for several years, really to try and help and improve examiner and instructor consistency. So it's the training and testing days is a new initiative that we think is more member focused.
Harry Peacock's got a question. We probably ought to give this to Ian Nelson to answer, but probably not. Probably shouldn't have said that. But would you have any advice on asking a club examiner to stand down due to his lack of currency? Retirement card?
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's what that's all about.
I think most people appreciate honesty, I think, and as long as you approach it with a certain amount of delicacy, I suppose. I would just raise concerns that ask them whether they feel they are up to, can display or demonstrate the requirements to an acceptable level, and then make your decision from there. Really, throw it back to the examiner. I would.
Then on the other side of the coin, Chris Anderson asks, if an examiner retires, is that it, or can, after maybe illness, apply again to become an examiner?
Okay, yes, we have. There's a subtle get out clause in there. I mean, yes, in principle, the retirement is a one-off thing, but equally we recognise that, say, for example, if we got a particularly young examiner who comes into the sport early on in life, and then gives up the sport for maybe 10 years while he has family and kids, all the sort of life experiences that we go through, and then comes back to the sport, say in retirement or whatever, there is the opportunity for them to become an examiner again. It's a sort of not quite a one-off thing, but it's a special dispensation, and that's via a request direct to whoever's scheme controller at the time. So the scheme controller would look at the circumstances and then refer it to the committee. So yes, in principle, it's a one-off, so that the people can't get multiple retirement awards, but it doesn't actually bar someone who may have a break from the sport for whatever reason.
Right, last two questions, and then I can see the Heckler Nelson is still going in the chat box. So we'll anyway.
Let's have a look at what he's saying. Come on,
just
Ian.
a simple injection on the field is what he suggested.
He's back to the naughty corner. That Ian Nelson.
He's out of here. I think we'll just throw him out in a minute. Barry Buxton, what about privacy, etc.? That is in the Damaras.
It's in the RCC as well.
I was going to say it's in the RCC.
Done. And the very last question, and then we'll save Derek Smalls. Andy, could you cut and paste Derek Smalls and email that through to the?
Essentially, it's a short answer, despite it being a long question.
Well, you've read it properly. I haven't a chance.
Yeah, there's no reason at all why any of these BMFA members that are generally flying in Spain can't do an achievement scheme test, as long as they've got a BMFA examiner to do the test. Simple as that, really.
Right. Okay.
There've been quite a lot of tests conducted out here in Corfu. I've
done tests in Spain and Gibraltar.
Yeah.
In fact, I got stopped at gunpoint by Spanish police from doing a beat test.
That
has to be some sort of record, that does, Andy.
Yeah.
What Andy's trying to say is, if you want to fly him out to Spain for a week, put him in a 5-star.
Yeah. He'll do your test for you.
He'll do your test for you. Yeah.
Andy's your man.
We'll cut and paste your email, and I'll get Duncan to respond to that in full. But and then last question, I think it's in the last answer about certification permit. Is there not the club officials abdicating the need to supervise all members? Most dangerous occurrences have been instigated by certified individuals. Wow. Keith back in for that one.
I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting.
No, I don't.
We'll bring him in to speak. He might be a bit clearer when I find him. Let me find him.
Ali Monroe, thanks you all. Very, very enjoyable. So that's really nice. Thank you, Ali. So if we've just got Derek, then I'll sort that one out and just.
He should be able to speak now. And A. Davidson, what's A stand for? You should be able to speak now.
Yeah, hello guys. Al Davidson. Over the years, I've been flying since '73, and it's been increasingly seen that a lot of clubs are using the you must have an A certificate to fly alone as an excuse of not supervising their own members. The majority of accidents or dangerous occurrences I've seen over the years have been done by so-called certified individuals. That's flying over the pits, flying over car parking areas, silly things like that can cause accidents. And they seem to be able, the club seems to say, well, they've passed their certificate, they're okay to fly alone. When it seems to be that they don't want to tell their friends that they shouldn't be doing it.
that's a matter for the
clubs, really,
extent, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they have a responsibility. I mean, I'm aware at quite a few clubs that where they will ask people to rejoin the training scheme. Quite a lot of clubs have it in the constitution, but it does require them to, to say to these people, hang on. And ultimately, people are regularly flying in an unsafe manner. The clubs have got responsibility to deal with it. It comes back to this duty of care.
Yeah.
It's the fact
actually,
that they've got an A or a B doesn't, all that really does is say that at a certain date and time they met the required standard.
Absolutely.
All in time, our faculties deteriorate. And if we don't practice, we do lose the skills. So we have to rely on clubs to deal with these situations, as do the club members. I mean, certainly if I were a member of a club and there was somebody regularly flying that was a danger to other members, I'd be saying something about it. It's not just always on the committee, it's that every member of the club should be raising the concern. It's too easy to just sort of for ordinary club members to sort of abdicate their own responsibilities as well. We've all got duty of care to everybody else, so everybody should get involved in dealing with these things.
Andy,
and actually, sorry, Kevin, go on. You go.
I was going to say, really, this should be covered by a club's constitution. The way the club is governed should really, if it's a good club, it'll be in there. If it's not in there, then perhaps it needs to be. But there should be a mechanism by which to deal with it, laid down, black and white, for everybody to follow.
And the other point I was going to make is we have over 20,000 members with an achievement scheme award of some level. So almost the statistics would indicate that it's more than likely to be someone with an award that's offending in some way or other just because of numbers. But I think the important thing is, as Andy said, an award is a measure of competence or a measure of ability at a particular date and time, and that could have been 20 or 30 years ago. So,
and if I went along and joined a new club, even as a chief examiner, I'd expect them to witness my flying before they said, yes, you're okay to fly unsupervised. And if I went along and I was considering joining and they didn't say they would be doing that, I'd probably seriously consider whether I was going to join that club.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think we're 15 minutes over, which is absolutely acceptable. It's been brilliant. We've had lots of questions. We've answered them all. Just thank all the
one missing
panelists.
from John Collister there, who's asking, is there a mechanism to revoke certificates?
Well, Ian will come up with one.
Yeah, there is.
It's
in the handbook. Yeah.
In the handbook. Yeah. And it's a rarely followed process. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, Andy, can you remind me, do we have a session next Tuesday lined up? Possibility.
We haven't yet.
We're working on it.
Probably aren't going to have one next Tuesday. The next one that is definitely nailed on is the 30th of November. And we've got our drone support officer, Chris Bradbury, somebody's not filming in London. He's going to do an introduction to camera drones, sort of things you could look for, sort of type of drones to go for, depending on what you want to do and things like that. So it should be quite an interesting evening. So I highly recommend that to everybody, but we will be sending an email out so everybody knows.
We are gathering quite a lot of sessions at the moment, just trying to get them all booked in and into the right slot. So we apologise for a slightly staggered start. But again, if anybody in the room is interested in a session and wants to get in touch with us, please do. We're open to a whole plethora of ideas. We don't know it all. We're just tailoring it to whatever you want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything. If anybody wants to put themselves forward to host, be the speaker on the session, we're more than welcome to have a go.
I can jump in with a little bit of an advert with my other hat on, can't I? We've got a Jet Modelers Association introduction to turbine flying in the new year. I can't remember exactly what date it is. I know Kevin will probably remember. What date is it, Kev?
I can remember it's the 15th. I can't remember which month.
whether it's January or February.
It's one of those two for sure.
Yeah. So that was a bit of
We
a.
let
That's a
you
bit.
lot fly jets.
Exactly.
So yeah, so let please feel free. Anybody in the audience there, come to us, and you've got our email, and we'll try and make it work. We're looking at this. We've got a couple from overseas coming in. I know Duncan's overseas at the minute, but he's really a Brit. He's here
Back soon.
back soon. So yeah, we've got a lot lined up. So we look forward to seeing you in a week or two. You never know. We'll let you know as soon as we can when the next session's on. But in the meantime,
An email will be going out very soon.
Thank you.
So I think if we say goodbye to our viewers on